Welcome to Wider View, the program that provides perspectives on the news outside the narrow confines of the mainstream media. I'm your host, Charles Dunaway, and I'm very pleased to welcome Keaton Weiss to Wider View. He lives in Beacon, New York on the Hudson River, and is a published playwright and award-winning filmmaker, it's hard to say, and the creator of the Due Dissidence blog, film club, and podcast. So welcome to Wider View, Keaton Weiss.
Oh, thank you for having me, Charles. Much appreciated.
Well, maybe let's kind of begin by talking a little bit about Due Dissidence. When did you start it? Why did you start it? And what are you doing with it?
Sure. We started it back in March of 2019. Long story short, after the 2016 election, which was a very, transformative experience for a lot of people, especially people my age, who kind of grew up being, more or less good Democrats. I was never actually a registered Democrat, but that was an experience of finding out that the Democrats who weren't who we thought they were. And so right after the election, a buddy of mine reached out to me about doing a podcast together. And I said, sure, that sounds great. And then that quickly fell apart because he started really going all in on all the Russiagate stories, and I wasn't, and he got mad at me, and that was the end of that project.
Yep, all right.
And then, I started talking to a great friend of mine who was at Harvard Law. We got to know each other when we both lived in New York City, and we just started talking politics all the time for hours on the phone, and when we would meet up in person. And he kind of told me, he said, you spend all this time talking about this stuff, driving yourself crazy. You should just be recording these conversations and put them in a podcast and see how it goes. He says, what's the point of just, driving yourself crazy talking to me all the time? And so I said, okay, that sounds great. And then, that percolated in my head for a while. And then when the Bernie campaign started, I saw immediately the corporate media rush to undermine that campaign again. Mm-hmm. And that was when I just said, you know what, I should just try it. I should just do it. Even if it doesn't go anywhere, what the hell? I said, I should, rather than talk to my friends about this stuff, I should do what I can to counter these media narratives, which is,
Mm-hmm.
That's in the intro to your show. I mean, that's got to be one of the reasons you do your show, right? I mean,
exactly.
You have to fight back against that. So that's why I started it. And then we created a blog to go with it, since I like to write, and I know some friends who like to write. I started it with a friend of mine named Richie Rosencrantz, who was in Newburgh, and he, I chose him as a co-host because he's sort of more an activist, and so he's really in touch with the grassroots. Mm-hmm. But turns out he was a little too much of an activist to stay involved. He's more of a talker. I mean, he's more of a walk the walk kind of guy than a talk the talk kind of guy, which is great. God bless him. He's still a good friend of mine, and we've done a couple shows together since. But then I found a great partner in Russell Dobular. He was just a guy that we met online, and I loved his writings. I invited him to submit some articles and come on the podcast and talk about them, and he's been great, and we've been kind of doing the show as partners ever since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really and it's really quite a good show. I mean, you guys have you have some really interesting conversations, and I think that's really why I got you on here, was because of listening to that podcast a few times. One of the things about the Democrats, I mean, you mentioned that your disillusionment with them as I am, but that's part of what I'm seeing, is that we've ended up with this kind of polarization where we have, if you're a Democrat, then every Democrat is great and you must not criticize them, except for Bernie, of course. And every Republican is just awful. And, so I see that the Democrats now are out. They're going to campaign for the next 2 years on QAnon, that every Republican is really a QAnon believer and all this kind of nonsense.
By the way, sorry to cut you off. The congressman who's pioneering that is Sean Patrick Maloney, my congressman.
Ah, good. Yep. Yeah. Nice. Well, too bad you couldn't get a better one. But yeah, I mean, this is the same thing what they did in 2016 and have done the last 4 years. I mean, is this, we've got polarization and demonization, but no policy. in
Right.
my opinion. Yeah, you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Um, and with this whole QAnon midterm strategy, you're just seeing that manifest
Mm-hmm.
itself once again. It's ironic. Russell, in one of the last shows that we did for our Patreon members, talked about the irony of Democrats insisting that everybody has to agree on the same set of facts, right? That's what they always say, and that's what's at the heart of the QAnon thing. Well, facts
Mm-hmm.
don't matter anymore, right?
Right.
Truth doesn't matter anymore, as if they are the arbiters of what's true and what's not true. That's one irony of it. The second irony of it is that in order to miss the Trump phenomenon, right, from when he
Mm-hmm.
announced to when he won, you had to have been living in a different America than half the country was living in. So
Mm-hmm.
who's living under a different set of facts when you look at it from that way,
Yeah.
right? When you
Mm-hmm.
look at it from that perspective, they're the ones who refuse to see quote unquote facts. They're the ones
Right.
who did not acknowledge the reality that so many Americans were living through. And so they're going to double down on that now. And Maloney actually said, he actually put it very on the nose. I mean, the quote that he gave to Politico, I believe, was the publication that ran it. He said, Republicans could either have the QAnon people or the college educated people. They can't have both. I mean, just a classist, elitist thing to
Mm-hmm.
say. That's your message. It always comes down to, invariably, no matter how long you argue with these people, it always comes down to, we're smart. Everyone who doesn't agree with us is stupid. That explains everything. That explains the way they vote. That explains the media they watch.
Mm-hmm.
That explains who they feel deserves to have a voice and who doesn't. That's why they're
Right.
cheering on the
Mm-hmm.
big tech censorship that's going on now. It all comes down to, we are the worthy ones. Everybody who doesn't agree with us is unworthy. I can't think of anything less democratic than that. And these are the people who call themselves the gatekeepers of democracy. It's just absurd. And one of the reasons why they are so anti-democratic in practice is because they don't have what you need to have in order to actually believe in democracy. In order to actually believe in democracy, you have to have confidence in the people who are being governed. And they
Mm-hmm.
have this fundamental distrust of large swaths of the American population. That's why they called them deplorables, right?
Right.
That's why they want them taken offline. So yeah, I mean it's anti-democratic. I mean it's just nothing they say makes sense when you look at
Oh
when
yeah.
you look at that.
Yeah, it's not only this elitist thing, but it also sort of reduces things to an ethical concern. We are the good ones. We are the ones who believe in truth, justice, and the American way. And you guys are rebel, QAnon, fascist. You guys are just awful people, and wouldn't you like to vote for us?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, no. Yeah, it's a crazy thing. One of the things that I had someone we were talking about this with Jim Kavanaugh a couple of weeks ago, but the idea of right wing populism. Now, that's what the Trump phenomenon, when you except for Trump himself, who of course is a con man, I think, but the phenomenon is really a kind of right wing populism. In other words, you've got people out there who want the government to do something for them. They want the government to make their lives better. Now, they may disagree with us on exactly what the government should do to get there, but that's what they want. But then, there isn't a vehicle for left-wing populism. If you're a progressive person and you want those same things, you're frozen out of the Democratic Party, and of course the Republicans. Although you guys wrote an article, I think, about maybe we should try the Republicans, but
Yeah, that was Russell wrote that one. Yeah.
yeah, Russ, yeah, I thought that was an interesting perspective. I posted that a few times. We have nowhere to go.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the thing that people have to understand. I mean, Russell wrote that piece as sort of a half serious provocation, but
Hmm.
I think the point to take from that, the point that I gleaned from that, was I think a very strong one, which is that, look, reforming the Republican Party into a working class party might be a crazy idea, but it's certainly not a crazier idea than thinking you're going to do that within the Democratic Party, we've run this experiment now in the
Twice.
past 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
The difference, and I wrote a piece recently about how right-wing populists are actually less hostile to class politics than mainstream liberals.
Mm-hmm.
Right-wing populists are anti-elite. Just
Yep.
that in itself. Now you say, well, that's not real class consciousness. We have to get over nitpicking about what is real and what is not real. No,
Right.
if you are anti-elite, it means you acknowledge a power imbalance between centers of power and everybody else.
Right.
Liberals don't want to acknowledge that.
No.
They don't have an analysis of that. And to the extent that they do, you hear people like Aaron Sorkin bragging that we should aspire to be elites. Elites are good. And so you have just a fundamental difference in the way mainstream liberals and right-wing populists view society.
Mm-hmm.
Right-wing populists acknowledge a certain power struggle exists. Now, are some of them die-in-the-wool bigots and racists? Yes. And are those the ones we're going to partner with? No. Right? We could be very clear about that going in.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean you brand all of them bigots and racists. And this is the thing. Glenn Greenwald put out a tweet yesterday. I think it was yesterday, either yesterday or 2 days ago, saying that the left seems to be the only political faction that actually aspires to get smaller. We're the only ones who are always looking at who among us is not the real deal. Who do we kick out next?
Right.
Kick out Jimmy Dore, or if you're Jimmy Dore, do we kick out AOC? Right? It's like we're always looking to narrow our ranks to find out who are the real leftists. It should not be any wonder why we fail to gain traction. That's it right there. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we need to be open to talking to people. Jimmy Dore was just criticized for hosting a Boogaloo Boy on his show.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are we going to win over Boogaloo Boys with left-wing message? Probably not. But what about people who may be curious about what the Boogaloo Boys have to say? Do we reach those people? In other words, the point of engaging the other side is not just to convince who you're talking to, but it's to convince their audience who may be watching them. Right. That's why Bernie went on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's a perfect example. This is a guy who has the most popular podcast in America. Millions and millions of listeners. 5 years ago, I remember Sam Harris was on his show talking about how he was going to vote for Hillary because Hillary was, the most mature of the candidates, implying that, Trump is a maniac, and then Bernie, just pie in the sky, socialist, whatever. Rogan fired back some line about how it's unfortunate that if you don't want to vote for Hillary, your only choices are a guy like Trump. And he categorized Bernie very dismissively at the time as a guy who hates money, right? Joe Rogan said, well, this is a guy who hates money, right? So he's not serious, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what happened? 4 years later, Joe Rogan says, I like Bernie. I'm inviting him on my show. Bernie went on. They had a conversation. Out of that, Rogan said to, I forget who he said to one of the future guests he had on. He said, I had Bernie on. I liked him very much. He seemed like a straight up guy. And I thought everything he had to say made sense, and I'm voting for him. Yeah. And so Rogan went from, this is a guy who hates money. Rogan's a bit of a libertarian type figure, and not necessarily libertarian, but you might even say has right-wing populist tendencies, right? Gun owner, that whole thing. Yeah. He's a guy who has what the liberals lack, which is curiosity. He has an open mind. That's why he interviews so many people, so many different kinds of people on his show, including, by the way, Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos. I believe he even interviewed Gavin McInnes, the founder of the Proud Boys, right? So where do you draw this line? If you're going to start saying, okay, there are certain people we don't talk to, we don't engage with because they're fascists or they're racists or they're right-wingers or they're Trumpers, where do you draw the line to determine, okay, who do we talk to and who do we not talk to? Do you write off Joe Rogan because he talked to Alex Jones? He platformed, that's the word they use. Oh, you're platforming these problematic, toxic people. Okay, so don't talk to Joe Rogan. Don't talk to the most influential podcaster in America who went from dismissing you as a guy who hates money 4 years ago to voting for you in the 2020
yeah.
primary.
And this
That's
is
what happens. But that's what happens when you talk to people.
sure.
That doesn't happen when you write people off as deplorables, bigots, Trumpers, boogaloos, whatever. And one of the problems on the left is that we seem to want to write people off. We always seem like we're looking to write people off as illegitimate or impure. And that has to change, especially if you're going to try to make the argument that the centrist liberals are the ones we can really convince, right? I mean, of all the people, these are the people who have proven to us now repeatedly over the past 5 years that they're not moving because they don't care about the issues we care about. It's not even that they disagree with us on healthcare, on wages, on climate. It's that they don't care. These people are gushing about Jen Psaki right now. That's what they do online. Oh, isn't it nice that she answers the questions politely instead of that pig, Sarah Huckabee Sanders? It's like they are a reality TV audience. That's what's so ironic. They lamented that Donald Trump made politics into a reality TV show. Oh, this is not a serious presidency. He's a game show host. Their entire understanding of politics is through a reality TV perspective. These people are smart. These people are stupid. These people are crazy, right? These people are level-headed. This one's a liar. This one is honest. This one's a racist. This one is that. That's all it is. It's all person. They don't care. They are not interested in politics, is what it comes down to. They have no real politics. This is all showbiz to them. Whereas a guy like Rogan may not have your politics, but he has politics and he has an open mind, and he might learn from what you have to say when you talk to him because he listens.
But But you're right. I mean, I think it's been for many years now. Progressives or whatever we want to call ourselves have had this laundry list. That you had to support every single thing. In other words, we have like a checkbox, all the things that are absolutely required in order to be a proper progressive. And if you lack one of those things or say something that sounds like maybe you don't fully support them, whap, we're going to get rid of you. We're going to cancel you. We're going to, banish you from our midst. There's no real understanding of class politics. And I think the reason for that, of course, is that you can't be a neoliberal and support the working class.
I mean, look, I think there's an element of truth to what you said, but I also think that one of the problems is that because the left is so online, they have a distorted view of their own relevance, and they probably underestimate the necessity of growing their ranks. When you're online all the time, and I'm online all the time, you and I are online right now. I podcast, I blog,
Right.
Our whole operation is online, so I'm not bashing online people. I'm one of them. But when you're online all the time, you tend to have a distorted view of your own relevance in the broader society. I mean, when Brianna Joy Gray and Sam Cedar debated Force the Vote, we watched that as a clash of the titans. These are two of the heaviest hitters, going at it.
Right.
The average person doesn't know who the hell any of those two are.
Of course not. No.
Right. And so, we have to be willing to step back and say, okay, we need more people in this thing. And where do we go to get them? We've tried, like I said, for the last 5 years to bring the liberals over. It's not happening. And so you're going to tell me that, you can't look to any of these quote unquote right wing populists? No, I think that's crazy. And I also think, though, because you talked about policies, most progressives that I know are on board with all that. Or full LGBT rights, women's rights, Native American rights, the whole thing. I don't think the questions are now even so much about policy. I think now there's a lot of division over tactics, a lot of division over basically, the most fundamental of which is, people who still think there's a future in the Democratic Party for progressive politics, people who still find the Democratic Party to be their home. Those are the people who tend to be more forgiving of AOC and the squad for not getting on board with the force to vote thing. And then people like Jimmy Dore obviously don't feel that there's a future within the Democratic Party. And so they tend to be much harder on those, quote unquote, progressive Democrats. I think the people who, that forced the vote thing was very interesting to me because
Yeah.
I supported
Mhm.
it. I thought he was right on the merits. I don't think he was right to accuse anyone who asked him a question about his strategy of having sold out or having given in to the machine. But I also don't think that the people who sort of attach their personal, feelings about Jimmy Dore
Mhm.
to that tactic were being very reasonable either. I mean, and this is this is a classic thing where you just have to forget all of that stuff and do drive in the direction that will give you power and influence. I mentioned Alex Jones earlier. Alex Jones, you know, he's not necessarily cut from the Trump cloth. Alex Jones is like a Gadsden flag waving Texan, don't tread on me guy, and Trump
Yeah.
is this big city playboy. And in the early days, and by the way, one of the reasons why I think Trump lost this time is because he didn't have Alex Jones on YouTube. Alex Jones got blacklisted. All right, but Alex Jones saw in Trump a horse that he could ride through the gates and crush the people he wanted to crush,
Right.
and
Mhm.
so he backed him. Right, he didn't get hung up on, like, if Jones were on the left and a Trump, he would say, "Oh well, this guy's position on X, Y, and Z is wrong, so the hell with that," and he would have been nowhere. And Alex Jones backs Trump, and I'm telling you, man, he is one of the main reasons Trump won is because Alex
Mhm.
Jones took his millions of followers and politicized them in a direct way, told them vote for this candidate. He never did that before. I mean, Alex
Right.
Jones didn't tell
Mhm.
anybody to vote for Mitt Romney or John McCain. I mean,
No.
but he got involved. And on the night when Hillary Clinton gave that alt-right speech, where she devoted 10 minutes of a national speech to him, I watched his reaction video. He's giddy with laughter. He couldn't believe it. He was delirious because he's like, holy, I'm not sure we're allowed to curse on this, but he's like, we won. We did it.
Yeah.
Now the Democratic nominee is talking about me. I'm a YouTuber. Like, when is the next Republican nominee gonna mention Jimmy Dore by name, right? Or say
Right.
like, when are we gonna break through in a mainstream space like that? We're not going at this rate because we're always at each other's throats, narrowing our own ranks over crap.
Yeah. Well,
You
I
know?
mean, part of this is the impact. I mean, it was happening this way with newspapers and even with cable TV, but social media has taken it to an extreme of where we essentially never talk to anyone and never hear anyone who doesn't more or less agree with us. In other words, you're not going to, open up your Facebook, and begin looking at your Facebook feed and run across, some right winger. I mean, they're not there unless you've friended them,
I
unless they're
have some friends
relatives.
who are,
Yeah,
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 but
but yeah, but I mean, most people don't. I mean, if you're on there because of political reasons, you're listening to and talking to the people that follow you because they agree with you,
right.
or you follow because you agree with them. And we then end up with this. That's why we almost have two sets of facts in this country. We have the right set of facts and the left set of facts, and they are not the same facts. And so we have no real way of having a discussion about policy because we can't even agree on what's going on. Because
Yeah,
we've heard completely different stories.
I mean, I think that's part of it, but I also would go back to what I was saying
Hmm.
earlier, which is, two sets of facts. This two sets of facts concern stems from there being at least two, really more than two, but
Hmm.
broadly speaking, two different realities in this country. The Forbes study that came out in 2015 or 2016,
Hmm.
whatever it was, said 63% of Americans could not afford a $500 emergency.
Right.
The car broke down, right? It's going to cost $700-800 to fix. That's the end of the world
Yeah.
for most Americans.
Yeah.
And the people, and the 37% of people who can afford to get the car fixed when it breaks down, they're of course living under a different set of facts than the people who can't afford to fix the car when it breaks down. Like, when you have this kind of inequality, that creates two different realities for
Yes.
people who are in dire straits and people who aren't. And so it should be no surprise to anyone that we can't agree on the same set of facts. There was a study came out. I cited it in one of my recent articles that said people without a college degree are now considerably more likely to experience mental illness in their lives than people who have a college degree. And so there, I mean, you're stripping it down to a scientific level. Now you have people's brains functioning differently depending on their education, depending on their class, right? So not only are they living under a different set of facts, they're almost different species now. You have certain people's brains are being wired differently depending on their class status. Chronic pain is now more common among middle-aged people than old people. What does that say, right? Like I said, there is no universal American experience now.
No.
And to a large extent, there never has been because of the history of, segregation and slavery and women not having the vote and stuff like that. But we haven't universalized the American experience at all from a material standpoint because you still have, people who are desperately poor living in a totally different world.
Oh yeah.
From people who not even, we don't have to talk about the upper 1%. I almost think that's I almost think that's too dramatic saying it's the 99% versus the 1%. It's really a struggle between the 63% who can't afford to get their car fixed when it breaks down and the 37% who can. Because so far we've seen very little to no solidarity amongst that latter group with the former. It doesn't seem like people who are, going along to get along, maybe they're not rich, maybe they're worth a few $100,000, comfortable retirement, whatever, nice house. Most of them, not saying all of them, most of them don't seem to give a damn about the 63% who are in dire straits. And that's why Bernie couldn't break through, right? That's why we can't build a real progressive coalition that is nationally viable, because that solidarity is just not there. And
can we get it?
We'll either build that or this country will go to hell.
How do we get there? How do we bridge that gap? How do we get the working class, the 67% or whatever it is, all together and moving in the right direction?
Well, it's a catch-22 because the way to convince the working class that politics can make their lives better is to show them an example of politics making their lives better.
Oops.
But that's a vicious, where do you start, right? That's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. I had the pleasure and the honor of interviewing Chris Smalls, the labor organizer, on our show last week.
Excellent interview.
His name. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was great that he came on. He's a fantastic guy. He started organizing workers at his Amazon warehouse in New York City back in March of 2020, when not only was the virus raging out of control, but ICU capacity was nil, PPE was nil. We had freezer trailers of dead bodies outside hospitals in New York because hospitals not only could they not treat people, they couldn't store people who had died.
Right.
The morgues were full. I mean, it was a truly dystopian situation. And people were getting sick at Chris's Amazon warehouse, and he raised concerns with management. They basically said, we're going to keep on business as usual. We don't want to cause a panic, quote unquote. And they said basically, if you want to stay home from work, you can stay home from work without pay. But we can't really take any reasonable safety precautions here. We just have to press on. And so he started organizing workers in his cafeteria. He didn't quit, but he didn't go back on the clock again. And they held a protest on March 30th outside the warehouse. 2 hours after that protest, he was fired over the phone. And then a horrible smear campaign that was coordinated at the highest levels of Amazon was mobilized to discredit him. Having been fired, he started, being a full-time labor organizer, which he's been ever since. That's how this is going to happen. If this is going to happen, it's going to be, it's Marxism, man. That's what Karl Marx said had to happen. Workers have to organize at their place of work and leverage their labor against the capitalists who are exploiting them. It's that simple. If we have a few thousand Chris Smallses rise up across the country over the next few years, we may be okay. If we don't, we won't. And so, I try to, amplify those voices as much as I can on my platform. I hope anybody listening to this, who I know you have a bunch of writers who come on the show and who listen to the show,
Yeah.
any audience members, if you see content like that, share it, because, that Smalls interview that we did, I thought was an important interview, but that's not sexy content. It's not entertainment with a capital E, if you will.
Right.
It's not gossip. It's not drama. I wrote a fun little, witty retort to the lunatic who wrote the op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle about how Bernie's mittens were white privilege. That blew up as soon as I wrote it. That had thousands of reads on the first day.
Yeah.
It's getting thousands of reads as we speak right now, because that's fun. Labor strikes, not so fun, right?
Not so fun.
But it's that's what's important. I mean, and so if you see that, if anybody's listening, if you see content like that, share it, because that's how this is going to happen. Because the working class doesn't believe that politics can change anything.
Right.
That's the problem. And that's, one of the reasons why we're in a desperate situation where we're talking about having to reach out to these quote unquote right-wing populists. You think we want to be in that situation? No, that's why we tried reaching out to the liberals first, because we thought they were our more natural allies. And so that door is closed. So now what? We got to reach out to libertarians or right-wingers? That's who wants to do that? The big sea of people out there who we can mobilize potentially are the working class themselves. And that's where the real energy is going to come from. But that's not easy to do.
No.
That comes from just nose to the grindstone work, the kind that Chris Smalls is doing, not the kind that I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Me sitting up behind a microphone with a podcast or writing blogs, that's not the point. The point is, and I don't even assume that my listeners are the ones doing that work. But if my listeners and my readers share the stuff with other people, and then they share it, and that's how you create a mass consciousness around this. And that's what it's going to take. It's that simple. There's no alternative.
We still are dealing with the same situation, even in this last election, where something like 40% of the people don't vote at all. And I think the primary reason probably that they don't vote is that they don't see the point. Is that if they thought by voting they would change their life situation for the better, they would vote.
I worked a seasonal job at a UPS warehouse over the holidays right down the road from my house. There was a guy there, black guy, just out of prison. He said, "This is the first election in my lifetime that I'm allowed to vote in, and I'm not voting." And so that's what it is. You go into these communities, into these workplaces, the idea of rallying them behind a politician or a candidate is an invitation to get your face laughed in. I mean, they will laugh at you if you try to sell them on a candidate, even a good candidate, even a Bernie candidate, who had more labor support than most candidates. But still, we're talking about a vast sea of people for whom any talk that any politician is going to do anything good for them is just a joke. And that's why what Chris Smalls is doing is so important, because he's not doing politics with a capital P, right? He's just saying, look, forget about who you vote for, forget about what your opinion is on this or that issue. We all have one thing in common, which is that our labor is being exploited by people who don't care whether we live or die on the job. And that's messed up, and we have to fight back against them. And out of that comes political consciousness, right?
Yeah.
It's out of a top-bottom class analysis and a top-bottom power analysis that a left-right analysis can be formed. But you can't go to people on an assembly line or in an Amazon warehouse with a stack full of books you just bought from the communist bookstore and say, "Here, read these and meet me on the picket line tomorrow." It's not how it works. You have to appeal to people's interest, appeal to what matters to them. You're not getting paid enough Let's just start with that. You're not
Right.
getting paid enough. You want to get paid more? Great. So do I. Let's work out the theory later. Okay? I'll share my books with you in a few months. But
Yeah.
first, let's all agree,
If you
we're
want.
getting screwed. We're being underpaid. They don't care if we get sick and die on the job. They don't care if we have a heart attack on the job. Amazon has had people drop dead on the floor. You know? I mean, that's where you start.
Yeah.
You start with, hey, you're getting screwed here. Let's band together so we don't get screwed anymore. And out of that comes politics. The politics comes second.
Mhm.
The politics, you can't lead with the politics. And this is another product of the left being too online. If you read political blogs and political journals and political magazines all day, you think, oh, if I only could show these great articles to the guy driving a truck 14 hours a day. It's
Yeah.
as simple.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not.
No.
It's obviously not as simple as that.
It's really hard getting at them. And I think the other thing we have to watch out for, as Margaret Kimberly said once on my show, was that, you know, the the Democratic Party is where great movements go to die. You know, this is, I mean, the one of the functions of the liberal Democrats is to take an idea, whether it's environmental, you know, save the earth, or whether it's Black Lives Matter or whatever it is, and turn it into, yes, if you want these, we want those things too, and if you want them, you need to vote for us.
Nancy
So
Pelosi said that explicitly. She
yeah,
said, you know, when she was attacked from her left, she said, listen, for every cause you're advocating for, I have a sign in my basement for that cause. As
yeah,
if that was supposed to be a winning
that's right.
argument. No, that's exactly the point we're
Yeah,
making. Is
yeah,
that, yes,
that's what she
people
does with
go
them.
into
She
the
puts it in
Democratic
there,
Party holding
yeah,
signs in the streets and they end up like you.
in the basement.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. They end up in
get
the
in the
basement
freaking
and, you
basement.
know, in
Yeah,
Nancy Pelosi's basement. You
yeah.
know,
Don't
the
get
person
any
whose
ice cream
basement they're
either.
in is worth $150 million now, which she accrued since getting elected to Congress.
You know, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think it's important to say, in the context of social media and everything, is the way that Democrats, even progressives like AOC, are getting behind this idea that we've got to clamp down on free speech on the internet. We've got to clamp down on those people over there, not us, but those people who are saying bad things on the internet, and we have to shut them off. I find this disturbing in that anyone who has any actual knowledge of history of censorship in this country realizes that it's not the right wing is going to be the object of the censor. It's going to be the left, because we are more of a threat. Fascism is not a threat to corporate power. You know,
Right.
socialism is a threat to corporate power.
No, I agree with that 100%. I wrote an article about this that I did not publish on my site because if I publish it on my site and put it on my social media, got to be honest with you, man, I'm a little afraid of my own followers who may have drank this Kool-Aid a little too much. And they'll report me to Facebook, and then my project goes away. This is what people have to understand. Like, we call ourselves independent media. The late, great Michael Brooks, God rest his soul, put it the best. He said, we call ourselves independents, but we're really just Uber drivers, right? We're working as independent contractors, sole proprietors, if you will, on these mega powerful tech platforms. YouTube, Google, Apple distributes the podcast. You know, I got a YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They can shut you down with no explanation, nothing.
Absolutely.
And so that article that I wrote ended up getting published by a right-wing publication, embarrassingly right-wing outlet called American Greatness.
Ah,
And, you know, I mean, if you look at most of their stuff, it's, you know, pro-Trump stuff and all kinds of stuff. But you know what? They took it. And this is a situation. I'll make my point to whoever will listen. You know,
yeah.
it's more an indictment of the left that they're not open to that argument and that I felt I had to publish it on a right-wing outlet. You know, the left should be able to hear that argument without reporting me to Facebook and Twitter and having my whole project canceled, which I was afraid might happen if I put that
Mm-hmm.
out on my page. This is fascism. The state partnering with tech oligarchs to silence whoever they don't like. That is as fascistic as anything Donald Trump did. To me, that, I mean, more so. I mean,
More
what
so.
could be more
Mhm.
fascist than that? You're literally putting the public square into the hands of these unaccountable tech giants who can just erase you
Mhm.
with the click of a finger,
Oh yeah.
with no explanation, no recourse, no accountability. If Facebook doesn't want to host neo-Nazis on their platform, I respect their decision not to host neo-Nazis on their platform, but there has to be accountability to the users. They have to be able to
Mhm.
look and say, okay, this is where you threatened someone with bodily harm. This is where you deliberately incited violent riots. That's why. And then there's an appeals process. And if you go through that appeals process, maybe you get a second chance, maybe you don't. There's got to be a process to go through. You cannot just put this kind of power in the hands of these people with no
No
accountability at
accountability.
all. They just demonetized a handful of progressive YouTube channels just saying that your content harms our viewers.
How?
What do you mean? How? They
Yeah.
don't say how. No, this is harmful. So you may have built your business around being able to advertise on YouTube, or I'm sorry, being able to get advertisers on YouTube. But we decided this content is harmful, so we're going to take that away.
Mhm.
Can you do the show anymore?
Well, and,
You
and
know,
of
I
course,
mean,
they twist their algorithms to make sure. I mean, we've all seen these things where various progressive left-wing websites and YouTube channels just suddenly drop the number of hits, by
sure, the
thousands.
apocalypse, they called that a
It's
few
like,
years ago.
yeah.
And the liberals' defense for this, the liberals give you they're private companies, they can do what they want.
Hmm.
The irony of that is that in saying that, all they're doing is restating the premise of what's wrong. Like, yes, that's our point, is that these are private companies with no obligation to operate within a constitutional framework. That's what makes them so dangerous. That's why
Hmm.
you either have to break them up, which is sort of the antitrust angle,
Hmm.
or you have to make them public utilities, one or the other. But the liberals don't want to do either of those. They just want Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg and whoever the CEO of Google is, I don't recall his name. They just want them to be their junkyard dogs. They just want them to be their
Right.
attack dogs. Okay, if you sniff out someone we don't like, cancel them. That's
Yeah.
fascism. I mean,
Well,
that's
of course.
absolute fascism. There's no other word to
And of
describe it.
course, each one of those guys delivers big sacks of money to the key Democratic politicos, whenever they want it.
Well, why do you
So,
think this big
that,
crackdown happened just as the Democrats won all, the House, the Senate, and the
right.
presidency? They're doing it to curry favor. They didn't do this stuff when Donald Trump was president, you know. And don't tell me it's just because of January 6th. It's not just because of January 6th. It's because
No.
they see which
No.
way the wind's blowing. They see who's going to have power over them, and they're sucking up to that power.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to try to wind this up here, but I want to make sure that people that are listening to this know where to find you and how to find your work. So maybe you can tell us where that at least today it's posted.
Yeah, right. Knock on wood. See how long we last. No, well, thank you, Charles, for having me. It was great talking to you. People could go to our website, dudissidents.com, where you could sign our email list. The Do Dissidents podcast. Some people get confused as the spelling. They think it's like dissident, plural. No, it's dissidents, the noun. So DISSIDENCE. Do Dissidents on any major podcast player. All the evil tech companies host our podcast. Apple, Google, all of them. And we're on YouTube too. We have a YouTube channel where we post some clippings from our podcast shows and some of our live streams. But Facebook, Twitter, all
Mhm.
of that. And for anybody who wants to support the show, we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/do dissidents. We do bonus podcasts and stuff like that for the people who can, for as little as $3 a month, sign up and help keep us going. But people are talking about the need to actually get in touch with their audience now in case they get disappeared from social media. They're like, people are
Right.
like, sign our email list because we'll always have an email list. So yeah, get in touch, and yeah, you can find us just about anywhere through all those channels.
Great. Well, good. And I really recommend everyone go to them. I'll put links, by the way, in the show notes for this podcast, so that if anybody didn't catch all that, we'll have a link for them to click. But anyway, thanks very much. I
Oh, thank you, Charles. That was a
enjoyed
lot of
talking
fun.
with you. Yeah,
Absolutely.
take care now.